So what we want to do is we want to go over, really I just want to show you guys how to send to mudbox, and I want to show you guys the basics of mudbox in this video. Next video we'll actually do a little bit of painting on our end table and our desk. So at this point what we want to do is we actually want to send this over, right? Now in this case we have multiple objects, right? And those objects have their own UV sets. So we don't really want to send them all over at one time. That's really not actually going to work well for us. So what we want to do is we want to send them over one at a time. If we send them over all at the same time, they'd overlap. And so you'd paint a texture on the top and it would actually go on this and go on those as well. We don't really want that. If you did want this to be one object, you really would combine them into one object, right? Your normal mesh combine. And then you'd make sure to kind of relay out the UVs so that there's no overlap. In this case, since we have multiple objects with their own UVs, we want to send them over one at a time. We're not going to send over the knob because, like I said, we're going to do material presets for that. There's like a brass or a copper preset that'll work pretty well for some of our metal parts. So it'll be a great way to just explore the fact that Maya and Arnold, right, our render, have some cool little material presets, and that not all texturing is actually about painting a texture or painting an image. So in this case, I'm going to select this right here, right, just kind of the top and the little bottom thing, and we're going to go to File. Alright, so we're going to go to File, and you'll see there is a Send to Mudbox. In particular, you'll see this is available if you're working in the same years of Maya and Mudbox. So if you're working in, say, Maya 2018, which I actually was earlier, you'll find that you don't have to send a Mudbox for 2019. So I'm just downloading 2019 for Maya. So you'll have to send a Mudbox feature in here. If for whatever reason you don't have it or you can't get the same years, you can always export selection as an FBX and import it into Mudbox. So you can actually get stuff into Mudbox through exporting and importing just like you would Maya. But because Mudbox is also Autodesk product like Maya, they have a send to feature that makes it pretty easy, at least for getting stuff to Mudbox. There is actually a send Maya from Mudbox, but it comes with some issues, and so we'll kind of export out in the more traditional ways from Mudbox later on. So File, Send to Mudbox, and we're going to send this first object as a new scene. And you see as we do that, what will happen is kind of nothing happens at the moment, but you'll start to see that Mudbox will open up. And you'll see kind of down here that there's actually a Connect to Mudbox opening. Technically, you can actually make changes in Maya and have it update. Sometimes I've seen that act a little weird with Mudbox, so I generally tend to find it's better if you're just done before you take it over. But sometimes you have to make adjustments during production, so you do have technically an update feature, which can kind of be neat. It's down here in the right corner. So update. So now you'll see that Mudbox is actually going to open up, right? And you'll see that there is the actual, and here we go, of course I'll say what's new features, and you'll see that there is that object. Now in this case I'm going to go back to Maya, because we have to send some other stuff over, right? So I'm going to grab the drawers, and I'm going to go File, Send to Mudbox, but this time I want to add to current scene. So instead of sending as a new scene, I want to add it to the current one I have. Now what's really cool about this feature is you can actually do it later on. So if I actually added some other models to this later on, even though I was already painting in Mudbox and like say I saved it and went away for the weekend because you're done on the weekends, you're hanging out or whatever, you can actually send stuff back over. So as long as there is a scene open in Mudbox, you can always add more objects to it. So in this case, we're going to add the drawers, the second object, to the current scene. So send to Mudbox, add to current scene. And then you'll see it is. And then we can go back and we can grab the legs. And we go File. And you notice we're in object mode, right? So I hold down right mouse button, object mode. So we select just the legs and we go File, Send to Mudbox, add to current scene. And there we go. Now at this point, we can go back to Maya and just close Maya, right? Because we don't actually need this to be open anymore. It's all in Mudbox. So in this case, we just close Maya and give it a second to close. And now we're just in Mudbox, right? And you see we're using like the educational version, just like you guys are, right? Which is all in here. Now, really what I'm going to do for the rest of this video, besides showing you how to send stuff, and we'll send it for other things, is one, I want to go over the interface. So really this is kind of going to be an introduction to Mudbox video. We're not really actually going to get much into painting quite yet. We'll save that for our next video. But you'll notice in Mudbox that you have up here on the corner File, and you can do New Scene, Open Scene, Save Scene. So Mudbox has its own scenes. So in fact, we'll just do a File, Save Scene As. And what we'll do is we'll actually see how it's actually taking us. Mudbox is actually taking us to that project we created, right? Scenes. So it's actually going to save this in Scenes. it is going to save it as a mudbox scene though, right? So instead of as a Maya scene, it's saving it as its own scene. So we could save that. And in this case, sometimes you'll see it, it's weird. Sometimes you need to add the mud extension. So we'll just type in .mud. Sometimes you don't, it's weird, honestly. But there you go, and you see it saves it. So of course there's a file menu and it has new and open and save scenes. So you can always open your scenes from here, of course. You can import, right? So you can actually import an OBJ or an FBX from Maya, right? So if for whatever reason you don't have to send to Maya, or maybe you're working in a software that's not Autodesk, right? Because 3D Studio Max actually has this same feature as well, because Autodesk makes 3D Studio Max as well. But not all software's that. Blender is not an Autodesk product. Modo is not an Autodesk product. Cinema 4D, Lightwave, there's lots of other software out there. So you can always import and actually export stuff in and out of Mudbox just like you would Maya. OBJs, FBXs, it'll take the geometry and UV data. So files like your normal file menu, right? And you'll see there's a send to Maya, but like I said, that comes with some of its own issues that we'll kind of address later on. So if we go to edit, right, you'll see there's undo and redo just like Maya has. So you have Control-Z for undos. That's pretty much universal for all software. You do have some selection features. And you can lock objects so that you can't edit them. So there's some stuff in the edit menu. Create menu actually has your ability to create some generic primitives that they give you, right? So if you just want to play with Mudbox and you don't have any geometry to send over, you can actually do that right here, right? You can drop a T-Rex in, you could drop a car in. They're not really awesome models with a great topology, but they're decent. You can play around with them, fun. You can actually create curves, a couple of different curve types. It's actually one of the neat things about this. Cogs will technically have Substance Painter, and in most ways it's actually the better texturing application than Mudbox, but there's certain areas where Mudbox is actually cooler. And kind of one of them is the ability to use different kind of curve types as objects. It's kind of neat. You can drop some lights in if you want to. Usually the default stuff's fine. Mesh. A lot of this we're not even going to use this semester. We're not sculpting in Mudbox. This is one of the cool things that Mudbox does do, is it is a high-resolution sculpting and painting toolset, just like ZBrush. Actually, several packages can do that nowadays. So you can actually do high-resolution sculpting, and that's for subdividing meshes and things like that. Display. You'll see that there's frame selection, much like Maya's F. You'll see there's isolate, which is just like, really works just like Maya's isolate select. That's quite useful. We'll use it sometimes on our projects. You can have smooth shade or flat shade, right? Sometimes the smooth shade doesn't look that great on a low resolution, like a boxy low resolution object. So you might just turn smooth shade off, right? In this case, it looks like it's looking pretty good on mine, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. But you can turn that off if you need to. If you ever get lighting that just looks like that, that's actually flat lighting. Turn that off, right? That's kind of annoying. You can turn wireframe off and on for your mesh, right? But just some display options in there. You can tell to show mesh errors. If you see a bunch of red dots, because some of you guys don't always have perfect meshes, or there's n-gons, right? You can always uncheck that to not show the mesh errors. So display, you can turn things off and on, visibility-wise. You can turn the grid off or on, right? UVs and maps, we'll see a little of this later on. We do have things like flatten and unflatten. We'll see that for some 2D painting on our blanket and pillows for our bed, right? I usually do that on a lamp too, but we're kind of skipping the lamp for this semester because of the weirdness of the situation. So there's some cool features in here. Render, you can technically do some basic rendering in Mudbox, but it's not really what you're going to use for our production, so we're not really going to cover that. Windows, you can set up your own hotkeys. It does have its own kind of properties menus and preferences, so you kind of have some stuff there. And of course there's help files just like Maya has. Right below those, you'll see there's 3D view, which is showing you your normal 3D view itself. There's UV view, which will actually show you your UVs. And there's image browser. And we'll actually get to see this particularly more on some of our projects where we can just bring some textures in, right? So 3D view, there we go. Now over here, you'll notice there is a sculpt and paint, right? This is for your sculpting stuff. Paint is where you actually get your paint layers. So if any of you have ever played or used Photoshop and done some painting in Photoshop or some digital imaging in Photoshop layers, this is the same stuff. It's just for texturing and for 3D models. So there's a sculpt button, there's a paint button, and that's the layer section. There's object list here, which is very much, you'll notice this looks a lot like Maya's outliner. It basically is. It's Mudbox's version of that. You'll notice, and layers have this as well, right? An eyeball and a lock. just like object list does in eyeball and lock, and that's for visibility. So you can actually turn the visibility for certain objects off and on in here, or even select those objects, right? Now these are just some default materials that Maya has that I brought over, some of those default Lamberts, that gray. These are just your viewports. You'll notice you can lock stuff, right? And that means you can't edit it. So kind of cool, but pretty basic and pretty simple. There are viewport filters, but they're really not super useful for what we're going to do, so you can pretty much ignore those. So kind of a little bit there. You'll see down here in the bottom left corner, we have Sculpt Tools. We're really not going to see these. I might do like a 5-minute demo just to get you guys to see what sculpting does, but we're not actually going to use them for any of our projects this semester. But these are the same kind of sculpting tools you'll actually see in Maya. It's just that Mudbox is really built to do full multi-resolution sculpting. So even though Maya has these, Maya has the Mudbox version of sculpting tools rather than Mudbox has the Maya version of sculpting tools, and you'll really find them vastly more useful in Maya, or in Mudbox, not Maya. There's paint tools, and that's going to be the bulk of what we're going to be using. So you can see things like paintbrush, eyedropper, airbrush, pencil, dodge and burn. There are curve tools. These are neat. We're not going to get to use them this semester, right? There's only so much I can do. We're really only going to be doing like 2 weeks of Mudbox, a week and a half, some basic painting. But there's some neat stuff you can do with curves. Technically compose your any characters or creatures if you want to. And there are some select move tools, which are actually quite good and useful. This is one of the things that Mudbox is, in my opinion, better than Substance Painter also. But paint tools is probably one of our big focus. We're going to spend a lot of time with that. And then, of course, to the right-hand side here, we have stamps. And you see these are pictures. These are actual images, right? And we have stencils, which are also images. These are kind of 2 ways you can get images to paint with, right? There's fall off, which makes the brush harder or softer. Material presets. Mudbox does come with some material presets. They're much more useful for sculpting. I wouldn't really turn these on because whatever painting you're going to do, it's going to tint them to look a lot more like that in here, and it's not going to translate back to Maya. So I would leave the material presets alone. Lighting presets give you a bunch of different presets also. Once again, I would leave these alone. We don't really need to work with them this semester. If you ever need to save camera bookmarks, you can. You'll notice in stencils and stamps on all of these, there's just kind of this little, and actually all of them kind of have it, right? It's kind of a little white circle with a little bracket. And the stamps and stencils and stamp one, if you click on this, you can actually add them, right? So Mudbox comes with its own, but you can actually add any of your own textures. In fact, textures.com, you can sign up for a free account. It comes with limitations. You can only have like 15 tokens to spend a day, and you can only get the lowest resolution textures. But the low resolution textures are still pretty good. They're still like usually like 1,000 to 1,500 pixel textures. So it's a great place to start building up a rock solid texture library for free. There's always Google, but with Google and Google searches, you have to worry about copyright. You don't want to use anybody's copyrighted texture. The nice thing about textures.com is that there's a lot of textures there. They're good quality, and they're also copyright free. So you fundamentally have that ability to use them for whatever you want, educational, commercial, and not worrying about any legal issues. So you can always add your images here. Image Browser also gives you an even better way when you have a whole texture library. Like when you have a folder of hundreds of textures, Image Browser tends to be a much better option. That's most of the Mudbox interface. So a few other things that we want to know about Mudbox. Well, if you hold down Alt, left mouse button, Alt left mouse button, you can rotate your camera. If you hold down Alt middle mouse button, remember that's just your scroll wheel, so you just press your scroll wheel down like it's a button. Alt middle mouse button moves the camera, and Alt right mouse button zooms the camera. You'll notice that's the Maya navigation, isn't it? Yeah. So one of the things I love about teaching Mudbox instead of Substance Painter, even though Substance Painter uses Maya navigation, is even though Substance Painter is arguably the better painting application, Mudbox is still pretty good, and it's a little more like Maya, right? It's very, very similar interface to Maya, so it's an easier transition for you guys to have. So just your same navigation works in here, right? And we even have that object list, which allows us to click on objects, right? And if we want, we can lock the other ones down, or we can just turn the eyeballs off, right? That's what's cool about the object list menu. Go back to layers here, and we want to make a layer, right? So you'll notice that there is this little white kind of, it's like a couple of pages, right? Kind of on top of each other. Although if you go to the little bracket, white thing above it, and click on that, right? You have new layer there, as well as your layer options. We're going to go over this more as we work in Mudbox. But this little white kind of page button right here, if you click on that, it's going to allow us to make a new layer. Now, at this point, we can label this layer, right? So we can call this, you know, end table drawers, or just drawers is fine for in mudbox drawers. So you can give it a name. You can pick the size, and you see there's some presets. I'll talk about this a little bit more in our conferences, but basically it's the number of pixels, right? So 2048 is 2048 pixels by 2048 pixels. You can save as a TIFF or Photoshop or OpenEXR. I mean, you can save as different bit depths, right? That really just means there's more bits per channel for each channel. So you'll actually get 32 bits of information per red, green, and blue channel, and alpha channel. Only 8 bits here. That does mean the texture will usually be a bit better quality. It usually kind of does a smoother transition between colors. But also, the file size will be bigger. There's no right or wrong, though. It kind of depends on what the file format is, what bit depth they need. If you're working on a video game, you're probably going to be working with lower bit textures. If you're working at, like, ILM on a movie, you're probably going to be using OpenEXR 32-bit because that's their actual format. And then, of course, there's the channels. And right now it's set to diffuse, which is our color channel, right? That's our color map. But you'll see that you can paint different shiny maps. You can paint glow map, which we'll be doing with our clock radio. You can paint bump to add like surface details and stuff like that. So we're going to see a couple of these map types. Not all of them, but a couple of them. So in this case, I'm just going to use the diffuse, and I'm going to hit OK. And you'll now see, once we give it a second to catch up, there's now a layer here. And you'll see that there's a layer, and it's got a strength, right? That's really just your opacity for the layer. And you'll even see right up here, a little bit above it, is your blend modes, right? And these will just change how the pixels interact with the pixels on a layer below it, right? They'll lighten them, darken them, sometimes inverse them. There's lots of weird different little math that goes into kind of how these blend modes work. And it's fun to just kind of try different blend modes out and see if they give you an effect you like. Very much like Photoshop, right? You can delete a layer if you want to. You can work with layer masks. Now, this yellow indicates that we have a selection, and I don't really want that. So we can always go to Edit and deselect all. There's actually a quick key for it, Control-D. And when we do that, it just deselects those polygons, but the layer is still available, right? And this gives us the ability to paint. Now, the moment we click on something like, say, our paintbrush down here in the paint tools, right? Any one of these you click on, whether it's a sculpt or paint tool, or even the select move tools, anything you click on in these menus here, when you click on them, this area that was kind of previously empty now has options. You'll notice there's color, right? So we can click on a color here, and we could pick a color, use eyedropper, and we can just start to paint right on there, right? Now, one of the cool things is you'll notice how it paints perfect right over there, like there's no seams. If I go to UV view really quickly, you'll notice those have seams, right? We did automatic maps, so there's a bunch of seams. This is one of the great things about 3D projection painting, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in our conference, where basically what it does is it projects the pixels from the camera. And so it goes right over seams. It's kind of like how a projector projects light onto a screen in our classes, right? It's projecting from the camera itself on your view. And you just kind of move your brush where you want to paint it. Of course, you can turn the strength down for the brush, so it'll paint a lot lighter. You can adjust the size of the brush, right? B for brush size, though, right? If you hold down B and you left mouse drag, you can adjust brush size. Also, your right and left brackets, much like Photoshop, will actually adjust brush size. So a little bit more about those. You can even turn symmetry on, right? The mirror features are mudbox's symmetry. So if I want, I can just turn X on. In this case, I had moved it. So in this case, I wouldn't want X, I'd actually want local X, right? Which is actually really neat. And you'll see how it actually does its own symmetry. Remember, this guy was actually already imported into a room. So like I said, it's kind of one of those things where you can always bring your stuff over one at a time or from the main scene. All right, I think that'll be a great place to stop just for some basic ideas. And then we can come back and do a little bit more video otherwise for actual painting.